Hello, and welcome to the next lesson in developing spatial thinking. Today we're going to be going over a subject called object arithmetic. So let's jump into what object arithmetic means. Object arithmetic is a method by which we will combine objects and develop a resultant image. There are four main ways by which we can combine objects, namely union, intersection, subtraction, and exclusion, and these are called object arithmetic operators. Now we'll look at all four of these examples on the illustration that you see on the right. What you'll also notice is that the illustration on the right is two-dimensional, as well as all of the examples that you'll see in your homework are also two-dimensional. And this is for the sake of clarity. You can apply these exact same concepts to three dimensions. However, they're much more difficult to illustrate, so the examples that you'll see in the PowerPoint are going to be done in two dimensions. So let's jump into our first object arithmetic operator, union. Union of two objects or more objects is essentially getting rid of any areas where they overlap. You'll notice that in the illustration to the right, we've gotten rid of the region where the two squares overlap their corners, and we'll indicate that with a dashed line. Now you won't draw the dashed line in your final illustration, it's just here to help with the example. So we can see the region where the squares overlapped, we essentially ignore, and we all fill it out to be the same exact color and the same exact depth. Next, we'll move on to intersection. Intersection is defined as the region where the two objects overlap. Now, if you had an example that involved, let's say, 7 squares, you would only illustrate the area where all 7 squares overlapped. For example, if you only had 3 or 4 squares overlapping at any given point in the illustration, your intersection would essentially be a blank illustration. Next, let's move on to subtraction. Now, subtraction is an interesting arithmetic operator because it can take two forms depending on the depth of the objects. You'll see in the illustration on the right that we've got the top left square having a chunk remaining and the bottom right square is completely disappeared. And what we're insinuating with this is that the top left square is below the bottom right square. And we'll see in this illustration that what we're insinuating is that the top left square is above the bottom right square. And that gives you an idea as to what subtraction does, which is it takes the topmost object and removes any section outlined by that, removes that from the illustration and leaves the remaining. So subtraction in this case can depend on the depth of the objects. So anytime that you'll be doing a subtraction on 2 or more objects, you want to take into consideration how deep are the objects to the viewpoint. Finally, we'll move on to exclusion. Now in this example, exclusion is almost the exact opposite of intersection. And in fact, exclusion is defined as the regions where there is only one object outlining a particular region. So we can see in the illustration on the right that the two corners where the squares overlap is a blank square and we're not part of the illustration. But the two regions where the squares don't overlap, we remain as part of the illustration. And that will complete this module.